I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Hey, Caroline, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Bryce. How are you?
Great. And one of the main reasons for that is we get to do some extra episodes of Overdue Finds.
We've done some pretty great bonus episodes in the past, and they're always a little fun opportunity, maybe to do something a little different or speak with a special guest. And I'm really looking forward to today's bonus episode.
Yeah, me too. It's funny because we've mentioned this on the show about how when we have episode ideas, we will send them out to staff via kind of like an internal posting, and we'll say, hey, this is what we're working on here over the next few months on the show. And we have an upcoming episode about Muppet Christmas Carol. And we had, as you mentioned in the last episode, the amount of staff that sent us a note saying like that they're interested, it was insane. And one of those people who came forward to say that they were interested, and I kind of got back to you as soon as I heard from this person, and I was like, I think this is like its own episode.
Yes.
Versus just, the Muppet Christmas Carol. And, we'll talk about that on a future episode, and we might touch on it here today. But I found out that one of our colleagues here at EPL actually wrote their own adaptation of A Christmas Carol. And not only that, but you can actually go see this at the Citadel Theater, which I thought was incredible. So joining us today on the show is he's a playwright, director, actor, and theater deviser, David Van Belle. David, welcome to Overdue Finds. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks very much for having me here.
I have to ask, what is a theater deviser?
A good question. Devised theater is like a form of making theater that uses all of the aspects of the theater to tell a story. So I used to co-run a company called Ghost River Theater in Calgary with my good friend and colleague Eric Rose. And we would develop plays by starting with an idea and then assembling a team of people first before we had kind of written a script. To conduct experiments, to see what kind of things we could do theatrically on the topic before we would write the script. So it's kind of a means of making theater that treats all of the different, what I would call the languages of the theater, light and sound and video and performance and actual words on the page, and treats them all kind of the same as text. And that kind of tends to lead to shows that are really kind of exciting and highly theatrical.
That's awesome. No, that sounds so fun, getting to kind of visualize everything and help bring it all together. A couple of years ago here on the show, we actually did an episode on your production of your adaptation of A Christmas Carol, which started in 2019 at the Citadel. It's running once again here in Edmonton this holiday season. It's running now. It started on November 26th. And running until December the 23rd. So I'm just curious a little bit more about your background. How did you get into the theater world?
Boy, it's just something that I always loved to do. Like, I think back about it to like being 10 years old and being in school and going like, are we doing a school play this year? Are we gonna do one? I was like that kid. I did it in high school. I joined a children's theater company in Hamilton, Ontario, which is where I grew up, and just like always wanted to be involved. But I spent a lot of time kind of trying to talk myself out of it when I came time to go to university. I thought, there were a lot of people saying, you can't make your living at it. Are you sure this is what you want to do? And so I thought, I better do something, a little bit more sensible. And I started as an English major. I thought I was going to go into journalism, but that lasted, about 4 months before I switched programs. And, it's just been like, I guess, the passion of my life. I've always wanted to do this, and I've been doing it, for 40 years now.
Thinking back to that period when you were that kid hoping the class would put on a play, were you also a big reader? What did you kind of like to consume?
I was like totally a reader, like all my life. Always had a library card. I remember like wearing out my library card and having to get another one. My parents were both big readers and always like encouraged us to read. And so, they were also, I was raised by Dutch people, so we're cheap. And so we spent a lot of time getting books from the library.
Just kind of getting back a little bit to the theater world. Were you involved then in drama in high school or junior high?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as I got into high school, and I went to high school in Ontario, so we didn't really have junior high. But as soon as we were in, just dove into whatever was there. I had an amazing drama teacher named Ed Nyman, who has since gone on to like a different career. But he had a huge impact on my life. And I remember going to see him years later. I was on tour in Toronto with a show, and I sort of looked him up, and we went out for lunch and just had the opportunity to kind of tell him like what an impact he had on my life and a lot of the people that I went to school with.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, people don't always have a chance to kind of share that with the people who've impacted them. So it's really nice to hear that you were able to do that.
Yeah, especially because, he kind of taught for a few years while I was there and then went on to other things. And, he had sort of said at that lunch that he, always sort of felt like they were just kind of like 4 years of his life, that, he wasn't sure what the long-standing impact of that was. And it was just a real treat to be able to just kind of articulate that to him, the difference that he made.
Did you act in any plays at all, or was there any stage productions that you were involved in?
Yeah, we did like one acts and that sort of stuff. And in my grade 12 year, we did a show that Mr. Diamond had written himself as well. So like it was kind of my first opportunity to be in a new play, and just kind of the chance to see that theater was important and that it could it could talk about the world in which we lived. So like that was going on. But then I also did like children's theater, which was, like Rodgers and Hammerstein. I was like Prince Charming and Cinderella, and, we did Godspell and all of this kind of stuff. So like a kind of a rooting in musical theater as well, too, as a lot of teenagers do.
Moving back to A Christmas Carol, you adapted the version that the Citadel started in 2019. How did that come about?
Well, I got asked to work on it by Daryl Cloran, who is now the artistic director of the company. The Citadel had a version that was written by Tom Wood, which is an excellent version that ran for like 19 years. Really a beloved version, but was, had maybe been around for a while. It was time to kind of take a new look at the story, as we do from time to time. And also, which is the case with a new artistic director, sometimes one of the things that they do is commission a new Christmas Carol to kind of mark a shift in the theater as well. Daryl and I had known each other before. We were sort of friends and colleagues. He had directed a show of mine back at Theatre Calgary called Liberation Days back in 2014, and we really worked well together. And so when he took over at the Citadel and he knew that I had moved up to Edmonton as well, he suggested that I take a look at it, and of course I said yes. It's a great opportunity.
Was it daunting at all to take on something so known?
Most definitely.
I would have loved if your answer was no. I would have loved either answer on that.
It was nothing. Yeah.
Especially in Edmonton, where that previous version was so good and had resonated with people for so long, and it was like a big part of people's Christmases, and like don't mess with people's Christmases. Like it's a big deal. And I remember, I'll tell you a story from the first year that we produced it. It's just a massive show. It's hugely complicated. There's like more than 30 people in the cast, and the technical elements, all of that stuff. And we
Multiple
got
levels of people too. Like it's not just one flat stage. There's a lot happening in this show.
Absolutely, always at all the times. It's like super complex, and we got to like the dress rehearsal. We were going to have our first preview the next night, so the first time that we were going to see an audience was the next day, and the dress rehearsal was just wretched. Like I think we had to stop the show like 12 times. Like the wardrobe staff always has a tradition of sort of sitting in on the dress rehearsal so they can watch, and the wardrobe ladies left at the intermission and all of this. And just because it was just kind of like tripping along, like it was not working that night, just for all kinds of technical reasons. And I went to bed that night thinking, oh my God, I ruined Christmas. Like like just the weight of it. And then of course the next day we got, it's like one of those theater Christmas miracles, and that we got to our first preview, and suddenly there was the show, and it was like, oh, okay, there it is. We can do this. This is gonna work. It's gonna work. But yeah, definitely that sense of pressure. And I had talked to a number of people who had done their own adaptations and artistic directors, and they were like, and some of them were like, oh yeah, no, I screwed it up. And so Daryl and I would always look at each other as we were developing this, and like our mantra was like, don't screw it up. So, that was our shorthand. So we put an awful lot of thought into it. I started work maybe 2 years before the show actually went up, and I started just by going to the current version and sitting in the audience and watching the audience. Who was watching it? What were they responding to? Why did I think that they were there? And what what was going on? And then started to think about what does this story need to tell us in these times? Dickens wrote this in 1843. And there's a lot of water under the bridge since 1843. How do we make something that speaks till today? And so we talked about a bunch of different versions, I think I went and talked to Daryl to kind of pitch 3 or 4 different versions, or it was more like a range actually, from straight up 1843, top hats and holly and hoop skirts, like one of those kind of versions. And on the other end of the spectrum was 12 people in a transit shelter on the coldest night of the year decide to do a Christmas carol for some reason, which I'm also really glad we didn't go to that part as well. But what kind of ended up kind of in between those two poles was something that really spoke to, for us, a sense of nostalgia that had to do with Christmas, just thinking about what do people get out of a Christmas Carol, and sometimes it's that sense of nostalgia, or of what are the touchstones that we have. And we really identify Christmas time with this whole Dickens, top hats and holly and gingerbread sort of world. But we also connect that to these classic Christmas films of the 1940s and 50s, It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street, all of those kinds. And so I proposed to Daryl, what if we did something that kind of lived in that world? So instead of the 1840s, we would do something that was set in the 1940s. And there's still lots of opportunity for gorgeous costumes and lots of beautiful stagecraft, but also something that kind of hooks into all of these kind of Christmas feelings that we have.
Yeah, I definitely the color, the costume, the beauty, the stage. I saw that a performance in that 2019 run, and it was hitting all of those things for me. That sense of nostalgia that wasn't mine, but I have as part of Christmas, that comes from the exposure to so many of those movies that you mentioned, that era, that I didn't live in the 1940s just as much as I did not live in the 1840s, but it feels like it's a part of the modern experience.
Yeah, because those movies are on like every year, like they're inescapable. If you're a person who doesn't like Christmas, you just can't get away from it.
Even like the setting of a department store, as well, and yeah, just the music, the people, the everything about kind of the staging of it was good. And I remember us talking in that episode we did in 2019 around how much sense it seemed to make when we heard things like, well, when you have the Christmas past trip and Scrooge is taken back to the past, well, that would have been the 20s leading into the Depression. And it just clicked on why this person had then become who we saw in the play. Like there was just so much sense in hearing the story of how this adaptation tells the story.
Yeah, a lot of things aligned in that, like including the songs as well, which is not a guarantee. Like I was looking at like what is the soundtrack of that Christmas time, and the songs in particular, but I would say even more than the movies, it kind of evoke that time. Like turn on your Christmas radio now. That's they started after Remembrance Day, and it's like a vast majority of the songs come from that post-war era, and when we started exploring them and seeing how they might fit into the story, there was just lots of opportunities there, lots of ways in which things sort of, would connect. Even something as simple as, Christmas past singing, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas just like the ones I used to know, and here we go to do all the Christmases that we used to know.
So so your current adaptation has been running since 2019. It's, 2022. It's been a few years. Does anything in the script ever change year to year? Or are there little tweaks made or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. That was part of my agreement with Daryl, is that we would write for the cast that was there, and that's an important factor for me in terms of like inclusion and not feeling like, oh, well, we can't do this because it says this on the page. Well, here's the playwright. He's more than willing to dive back into this. So one of the things, for example, this year, which has been a goal for us for the last number of years already, was to include a Tim who had a lived experience of disability. It's one of those roles that sort of gets, played by able-bodied actors, and we're just very much felt even at the beginning that that's not on for right now. We need to be like that. Everybody needs to be able to participate in the theater if they've got a passion for it. And so we made adaptations to include Elias, who's our new Tim this year, to make it possible for him to play the role this year. And sometimes that's in just sort of acknowledging, where he needs support, and at other times giving him a little bit more teeth. One of the things that I really appreciate about this version with him is that, his mom sort of, worries over him, and he says, I'm fine. He kind of, gives her some grief over it, which kind of comes out of, his own experience of living.
When you reached out to us, you mentioned that as part of your work on this, you had watched a number of adaptations of A Christmas Carol. What was that like?
Yeah, it's really great to see a story told so many different ways, and to go back to some of these really classic films, even like actually one of the very first Christmas Carol adaptations on film was a silent picture. Like one of the first silent films was an adaptation of A Christmas Carol, rather. And it was a real treat to kind of like build in little homages to all of the different versions into the show, which are there if you want them. Things like the 1950s Alastair Sim version includes the death of Fanny. Spoiler alert. The death of Fanny, which is Scrooge's older sister, who we meet in Christmas Past, and sort of includes that aspect about like what effect that might have had on his character. And I thought that was such a beautiful part of the story that we put it into this one. But there's other little things as well too. The 1930s version has a little scene where Christmas Present stops two men from having a fight by like sprinkling Christmas cheer on them, and there's that beat is in at the top of Act 2 as well. So it's fun to kind of just honor all of these previous tellings of the story in this version, and there's even at least one or two homages to Tom Wood's version in there as well.
So you obviously watched a lot of adaptations. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Best and worst, in your opinion. If you don't want to name worst, that's fine. But did you have a favorite that you watched?
Yeah, for sure. Well, okay, I kind of have two favorites, and one is because I watch it every year with my kids, and they love it so much. So, like, those things kind of transmit over to me, and that's like Mickey's Christmas Carol. We watch that one a lot, as you do when you have kids, and so I'm really familiar with it. And I just think it's fun, and my kids love it. I'll tell you the second one that I love in just a second. The one that I'm not so crazy about is like it came out just a while back with Jim Carrey. It was like kind of an intensely CGI version, and I think a lot of people didn't, care all that much for it. And I think it's because it just feels a little bit sterile. There's a lot of flash in it, but I don't know that they kind of like the storytelling just kind of feels like it kind of hovers around the outside of the story and never really kind of dives into the heart of it. But the other one that is really high up on my list is The Muppet Christmas Carol, which is why I reached out to you folks in the first place.
So with The Muppet Christmas Carol, what are your thoughts on the movie? I personally just watched it for the very first time a couple days ago, but obviously you've seen way more adaptations than we have. But what are your thoughts on that movie?
Well, there's kind of two things that I really want to say about that. And the first is that, as you might know if you saw my adaptation before, that one of the things that we did that was really different was instead of Bob Cratchit, we kind of killed Bob Cratchit off. In our telling, Bob dies in the war. And it's Mrs. Cratchit who is, working at Marley's department store under Ebenezer Scrooge, and she's kind of his long-suffering manager that he's not very nice to. And as I was writing the play, it was like, okay, so what's Mrs. Cratchit's first name? And I started digging around. I mean, like, nobody ever says what Mrs. Cratchit's name is. We even put a little joke in there in the top of Act 2 when we visit the Cratchits at home. Scrooge says, "Oh, it's Cratchit." And Christmas Present says, "She got a first name, Scroogey?" And he goes, "Probably." It's like Scrooge doesn't even know what her first name is, But there was, to my knowledge, only one Christmas Carol adaptation that gives her a name, and that is A Muppet Christmas Carol. She's played by Miss Piggy, and her first name is Emily. And so in my adaptation, Mrs. Cratchit's name is Emily Cratchit. So that's my homage to Muppet Christmas Carol that's in there. That's the one thing. But the main thing that makes me love A Christmas Carol, the Muppet version, Muppet Christmas Carol, is because of Michael Caine. And he made a really deliberate choice when he started talking to Brian Henson, the director. He said, "Listen, I'm going to play this straight. I'm going to play this as if I'm going for the Academy Award in this role," and he does. So around him is all of this goofball stuff, and like he's talking to like singing pigs, and there's it's being narrated by a guy with like Gonzo the Great, but he plays it straight. And that mix, I think, is so beautiful, and that really kind of elevates that version from being just kind of like a parody or a satire on the show to like something that really kind of hits the heart of it all.
Yeah, they could have put kind of the big star of the day in that movie and kind of played it more tongue in cheek. But yeah, when I was watching it myself, like Michael Caine absolutely nails that role. And yeah, it was really, he has, like you said, he has a very powerful performance. And yeah, you can definitely tell that he was like, okay, doesn't matter that I'm acting opposite like this puppet. I'm going to treat it as a real person. It was incredible.
He's frightening in the role, like he's really so stern and angry, and and for me that kind of adds like a real sense of drama to it, like it's an adaptation that's really accessible for children, but there's danger in it,
One of the things I love about that version is that Charles Dickens is a character in it. Yeah. And it really kind of amps up the meta-ness and Muppet silliness, of course, but having Charles Dickens being there reading some of the lines, I think grounds it in the idea of a text that some adaptations can get away from, for sure.
And it really grounds it in its origins too, because like Dickens' own voice is so strong in the novella, and so much of what he says in his turns of phrase are so beautiful, like even when they're not spoken by characters, that sometimes you kind of they end up, the good adaptations I think take some of Dickens' narrative and put that into the character's mouth. So like one of the first things that he says in the novella is Marley was dead as a doornail, and so you try to so in my version Scrooge says Jacob Marley's been dead as a doornail for 7 years, so you try to load those in. But you're right, when Gonzo is gonna can speak this as Dickens, it's a great way to just kind of bring that voice out even stronger.
Looking at your version, your adaptation of A Christmas Carol, what are you most proud of in that production?
That's a really good question. I think it's that I'm really proud of this as an ensemble piece. Like there are so many artists that work on this show. It's got to be well over 100, in addition to the actors, but the people who put their care into crafting just the right prop, the designers who put so much thoughtfulness in it, and even down to the ways in which the show is sold and marketed. Like I think those are all like parts of, this is my devising past coming back here, but like these are all parts of creating theatrical meaning. So many different ways, and I mean I love that about the theater in general, but like so all of that intention and all of that artistry comes forward to telling this one story for an audience to enjoy.
Why do you think A Christmas Carol is a story that still resonates with audiences?
That's a really good question. I feel like it has kind of entered this realm of like mythological stories after 100 and more than 150 years. My gosh, that's a long time. It's a long time to tell a story over and over again, but there's a long history of that throughout literature. Like if you look at Shakespeare, did Shakespeare tell his own ideas? Usually not. He was always riffing on somebody else or telling a story that somebody else had told, or had done a different version, of, and so a lot of his plays are adaptations either of history or of pre-existing stories. For me, like every year when I write my playwright's notes, I always have like a little essay that goes into the program, and I always think of us as in the audience as Scrooge, and that Scrooge is our proxy in the midst of all of this. He's on stage for like 95% of the show, and I feel like we're asked to kind of go on that journey with him, and without being moralistic, it really is a play about morality and about how do we live moral lives, and the show calls us to think about other people, like not just at Christmas time, to keep it to keep the lessons of Christmas in our heart all through the year, as Scrooge says, which I think is really valuable. And so it's a chance for like introspection. I wrote this year in my playwright's notes about why it's so hard to play Scrooge, just thinking about John Eliot, who was our new Scrooge this year, about him having to be in a place of discomfort the whole way through. That's a hard role to play, like he goes through discomfort through like maybe 7/8 of the show, and then the last eighth he gets a little bit of joy at the end, but we're asked to go through discomfort as well, to go like, what are the things that we need to change about ourselves? Where have we withheld ourselves from our loved ones, from the people that are around us? How have we been misers in our own spirits? And can we do something different? Can we have an opportunity to change something in ourselves?
Yeah, I'm a little struck by that. I don't know why I've honestly never thought about Scrooge being the proxy for me when I'm watching it, and how that has shaped my understanding of the story, because I agree it makes total sense. I have just never thought about it that way, and I am going to be thinking about that for the rest of today at the very least, if not the rest of this Christmas season.
Well, it's hard to do because he's not very likable, right? So we always think about like heroes as people who are like admirable or whatever, but like, can we look at a character?
I genuinely think if you had asked me before this conversation who the audience stand-in is, I would have said Bob Cratchit, and I would have been wrong, I think. So yeah.
We want to think of ourselves as good and, meek and humble, but, like I'm going to speak just personally, like I'm not, like I've got a lot of things in me that I come up against. And, I think even with us coming out of this pandemic time, I think it is a time for soul searching, about like, can we repair our relationships that have become frayed or broken? Can we let go of things that have held us back, that have, honestly have caused ourselves suffering? Like Fred says in the play, and he's borrowing, and I'm borrowing from C.S. Lewis. He says we're not punished for our sins; we're punished by them. Can we let go of these things, our own inner miserliness, and open ourselves up to lives of joy instead, and generosity and openness of spirit? Like I think it has been very easy for me to be protective of myself. Can we find a way to kind of heal from the trauma of the last few years, and live lives that have more joy in them?
So, of course, with our show Overdue Finds being a library podcast, and I'm sure you have awesome recommendations in the branch when you're working with our customers. But do you have a book, movie, TV show, or even music recommendation that you can share with our listeners? I
have one of each. Can I do that?
Sure. Yeah.
I got a book, I got a movie, and I got a CD. For the book, I just finished reading it. It's actually one of our YRCA picks for this year, which I really love. In the junior category, I'm always reading the junior category because I have a 9-year-old at home who's a voracious reader, and I'm always looking for new books for her. And one of the ones that I've just started to dive into, but I just love this one, When Stars Are Scattered by Victoria Jameson and Omar Mohammed, which is a graphic novel which is set in a refugee camp in northern Kenya. There's two boys who are Somali refugees who have been there for years, a boy and his brother Omar and Hassan, and just about their experiences living in this refugee camp. And it was just so eye-opening for me to sort of understand a little bit more what that experience was like. And I'm working as an LA at the Abbotsfield branch, and we have a strong Somali community in this area here, and it's just made me kind of look at some of the members of my community in a different way, and to go like, where have you been, and what brought you here? What is the story that's behind your presence here? I find the Somali community so amazing, and they're also a real community of writers, which I also really identify with and enjoy. Like they're a nation in which poetry has been very important. So that's my first one for a book. For a movie, and this has been plugged in other places, but I just loved it so much. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, which is written and directed by Dan Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, and it stars Michelle Yeoh. And it's kind of like, I guess it's sort of sci-fi. It's kind of like a reality jumping, like multiple universe kind of movie. And it just goes so many places that it's a movie in which anything can happen. And I love those kind of movies where, like they end up in one reality where everybody's fingers are like hot dogs. Like just weirdo stuff. And so I found that so entertaining and engaging, and it's such a good adventure film as well. So I'd recommend that, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
I was just going to say, easily, it's like the most original movie this year.
No doubt. And I love being surprised, I love it when a work of art surprises me, because it's so hard to surprise people these days. But like literally, it was like, I have no clue where this is going to go next. I'm just going to hang on and go for the ride, It's like being on a roller coaster. And my last pick is my current favorite Christmas album, and I'm going to just plug a Christmas album because I think it's a good thing to do, which is called Jingle All the Way by Bella Fleck and the Flecktones, which is another very surprising Christmas album. I think it came out, it's maybe 10 years old by now, but certainly worth like checking out at the library or getting a hold of a copy another way, or tune it in on your Apple Music or whatever you do. Bella Fleck is kind of like a blend of world music and jazz and, extra banjo. And in this Christmas album, he also works with Tuvan throat singers. So like the mix is just wild. And again, that's another work of art that I find really surprising, in that the way the arrangements of these Christmas songs that we all know are really unusual, like, including Tuvan throat singing, in the midst of it. So if you get a chance, catch that one. That's Jingle All the Way, Bella Fleck and the Flecktones.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, David. This has been just a great conversation. I've loved learning and hearing so much about your experience with A Christmas Carol. Where can people go to learn more about A Christmas Carol and your other work?
I've got a website. You can check it out and see some great stills from A Christmas Carol, and find out about some of the other things that I've made over the years. davidvanbelle.com, and that's Van Belle, VANBELLE.com.
Great, and we'll make sure we have a link to that.
Yeah, watch today's show notes, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't yet, we encourage you to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And even more importantly, please tell a friend about the show. We love to hear from our listeners, and you can email us at podcast@epl.ca. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.